All right, it says we're streaming now live on Facebook. So we want to welcome everybody back to our series again, Relevant Conversations in the Current Crisis. And again, our aim is really building an online community where we have a shared perspective, where we come to understand a little bit more about each other's side of the table, and even bring together certainly things that may not have been thought about as we're going into this COVID-19 or as we're in the throes of this COVID-19. And I'll tell you that based on some of my previous conversations with these two gentlemen who are joining me today, there are things that I hadn't even thought of, even as a small business owner. So we're going to be dealing with the insurance side of things and some risk management as it relates to COVID-19, especially coming on the heels of our governor trying to reopen up the state in phases. So there's a lot to consider here. We want to encourage you to follow along with us and utilize the question and answer feature of Zoom, and we'll try to get to your questions here live on this broadcast. But I want to welcome both of our guests today who have a wealth of experience as it comes to the insurance industry, both on the business and the as consultants as well. Not only are they agents, but they're both duly licensed as agents and consultants, and they bring a lot of years of experience to the table here. As we try to discuss this issue, we're going to be talking about business insurance and mitigation risk and the things that you need to know. And you may raise even questions that we haven't thought of yet. So we definitely want to encourage you to participate. We have Mr. Chad Kiper, who's with us today. He is the owner of the property and casualty insurance firm here in Lexington, Kentucky, called Slade Collins, and it's been around for a long time. Chad's been working there since 2006. And we have also George Ruppert, who's with us today, who been in the insurance world for a long time. George, do you mind if I mention how many years, or would you like to mention how many years, or we're going to keep that hush-hush?
Not at all. I'll let you have the floor.
So as you told me yesterday, you're on your 60th year. Is that correct?
I've been being agent and now licensed consultant for
licensed consultant. So we and George definitely keeps his finger on the pulse of the industry. There is no doubt about that based on some previous conversations. And Chad is very proactive in his approach to insurance in his business. So we're very happy to have both of you here with us today. And we look forward to some of this discussion that we have as it relates to this topic. I think every small business owner should be engaged in definitely pushing the pause button in life, just to kind of take a step back, breathe, and consider a lot of the things that we're going to be bringing to their attention today. So appreciate you gentlemen taking the time to share your wisdom with us, and we'll get started here. There's a lot to consider and really swallow here that, we get so focused, or at least I do as a small business owner. We have the 5 o'clock daily updates from our governor, and he has certainly locked the state down, and now we're looking at reopening. So we have issues that really we probably may or may not have been aware of as we're looking at the lockdown, but we also have issues that are going to be coming up and cropping up as we relate to the phase in of everybody kind of getting back to business. So there's just so many questions here to go about, but I want to deal with kind of first things first, because I know that as a small business owner, we had this question kind of going into this crisis. And I know we had other small businesses that had questions about business interruption insurance and whether or not events like this, are covered by that business interruption insurance. And or there's a lot of small businesses out there who may not have even thought about having business interruption insurance, but certainly need to think about it now. But we also need to understand how that landscape looks as far as business interruption is concerned. So maybe help us understand what the intent of business interruption insurance is for, and then what do we need to understand as business owners as to whether that policy applies in this case?
Well, thank you, Mark, for the nice introduction. And we discussed this in the prior meetings, is that on the business interruption side, it's a property-driven coverage where you have a direct physical loss that needs to occur, a disruption of operations with that location in order for a loss of income, also known as a loss of income, a time element coverage, or business interruption for a business income claim to occur. Unfortunately, the last few weeks, we've fielded quite a few phone calls, asking about this. And unfortunately, we've had some tough conversations with our clients. At the same time, we, in some previous discussions, is to continue to file claims, knowing that more than likely it's going to be a declination of coverage because there was no direct physical loss. That is the hard pill to swallow for our clients, and understandably so. So if the communicable disease is not a direct physical loss to the property, it doesn't disrupt, it was more of a civil authority that took place, shutting down the businesses without a direct physical loss from occurring, so the contract doesn't respond to that. Anything you'd like to add to that, George?
Well, you're right on point as far as the interpretation of coverage at this point. And as we've discussed, there's a number of fixes out there, some headed through the courts, some in Congress, and that's why we suggest to go ahead and determine what your loss is. If you have business interruption coverage, get with your agent or your insurance advisor and determine what your loss would be or is if your business interruption coverage would apply. That way you have set up the loss in the event that one of these schemes should provide retroactive coverage. There's Congress is in the midst of a terrorism-like coverage bill, like that for this pandemic. Whether that would be retroactive or not, we'll not know. But I do agree with you that anyone with business interruption insurance should go ahead and make a determination of what the loss is and let the insurance company have that information, and they'll probably decline it at the moment. But at the first moment coverage becomes available, if it ever does, you'll be first in line.
So let me ask you a question. Business interruption insurance, ordinarily, if we think about a couple of situations that it may apply, since we're talking about the actual loss as it relates to the physical property, correct?
Correct.
Number
Yes.
one. So if a business ordinarily, let's say when would it have ordinarily kicked in? Whether you had maybe a flood or a fire in a physical location would be the typical situations in which you would see business interruption.
Correct.
Okay, and then what makes this a little unique, I guess, is one, we're dealing with a communicable disease, so that normally wouldn't be involved, in any of the language that currently exists in insurance documents. But then we literally, it's not a damage to the physical property, but yet those properties in a way have been shut down by government, and many of them limited on the ability to generate revenue as a result of that. So is that where we kind of have this a little bit of a gray line here between what really is physical damage to a property versus the property itself not being able to sustain revenue generation?
That's what all these lawsuits that have been filed in various courts around the country will ultimately determine. Can you define a loss to include pandemic virus damage in terms of being shut down by the government? We've never faced this before, but there is pandemic insurance out there, but it's always been for big organizations and companies like Wimbledon in England that spent a fortune carrying pandemic insurance for the last 20 years. Now they're going to get to use it. But down in the small business category, there's practically nothing in a policy, even the broadest policy you can buy, that at the moment can be jury rigged into determining that it's a source of coverage for a pandemic.
Let me give you another example. We deal with healthcare, a lot of healthcare clients, and we had a particular client who had an employee that they thought they went ahead and sent this employee out to be tested, and in the event that employee indeed was found out that they had COVID-19, then they were going to be required as a business to shut down kind of self-quarantine for that 2 weeks and sterilize everything in that office. So when you have a specific situation like that, does that get a little closer to the line as a result of the fact that you've literally had to do something physical to the property in order to put it back in service?
That's why it is so important to document every detail with respect to why you shut down.
Right.
Because there'll be different reasons. Some of it will just be government fiat, you need to close, so they close. Others might be like you said. One gets it, they send them all home. But to me, the biggest hope right now, in my opinion, is this business of some sort of 9/11 bailout. And that's another bill that hasn't even begun to see the light of day, but a large association of employers and insurance companies have asked President Trump to try to put together a program that came after 9/11 that directly compensates people who were damaged by that occurrence. That would fit the bill for all these people.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going along around in Congress right now is a way to do a terrorism act kind of thing, which may not back up and help anybody that's already in the box and only be good going forward, which is not going to do any of us any good at the moment.
Okay. So as far as it relates to business, let's kind of wrap that section up. So you say really what you need to do is probably it's best to go ahead and get your claim ready and filed.
Correct.
And at the end of the day, what may win, well, at the end of the day, there are a couple of things that may win. One, any kind of retroactive action on the part of Congress or whomever that would make some of this application go backward. But in the meantime, we all need to be prepared to just document.
Correct.
And that goes as far as, not only documenting your reasons, but actually going in. And I think, Chad, can I kind of ballpark this back to you? You mentioned that there's a formula there really for business interruption. Am I correct? That's typical.
Just a real basic formula. Business income equals your net profit or your net loss, plus your monthly recurring expenses, plus 60 days payroll. And then there's some additional endorsements and things you can make to that to provide some extra expense. But that's your basic math equation to calculate a business income loss.
Okay.
So a net loss can count against you just as well as a net, on there. So if you have a net loss, that's going to be accounted for in that equation.
Okay. So if you have a net loss going into it, is what you're saying. If you had a net loss going into this situation, that's definitely going to impact you. But there's other components of that equation that may come into play or may not. Is that safe to say?
Break it up.
Oh, I'm breaking up. Okay, hold on just a second.
That's better now.
Okay, let me back up and say that again. You mentioned if you already had a net loss, and I'm assuming you meant Chad's gone. All right, we got to get him back here somehow.
Here.
You're still there?
I'm here.
Okay, well your video went off, so let's see if we can get you back on video. While I'm working on that, I'm still going to ask you a question. So you mentioned business loss, that if you had a net loss going into COVID-19, that's going to impact the formula that you just mentioned. But that does or doesn't necessarily mean that other factors won't come to play to possibly get you some relief.
Right, that is correct.
Okay.
That's just the industry standard equation to calculate a business interruption claim.
Okay. I just sent you there we go.
There you go.
I just sent you a link. That's okay.
In that example we used about sending the employees home and having to spend all this time and effort completely disinfecting everything and cleaning, that cleaning might be extra expense. What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, I believe it's not an ordinary expense. It would be considered an extra expense.
Yeah.
Right. And I would imagine beyond, because there's kind of new guidelines, at least that are being pushed out here as to the extent that you need to go as it relates to common areas, as it relates to most frequently used areas in the business. So this is a little bit of a moving target that we're going to have to watch very carefully, very closely. We're going to have to pay attention to the guidelines that are being pushed out from Bashir's office and other office and the CDC. Because
one
that's
other thing too, Mark, this is a wake-up call for everyone.
Okay.
To review. There's a lot of policies that are out there. They're not all designed the same. There's some things to review in your policies to make sure that there's additional coverages in there, not just for this situation, but other situations that would render your operations useless, that you have no way to continue on. Extra expense is just an endorsement to a business income policy, a form. So you have actual loss sustained, or you can just buy limits of business interruption coverage. These are times to sit down, review what you have, ask questions. What can I do to provide these additional coverages to make me feel a little bit more at ease? And I tell my clients, I'm not always the least expensive guy in town. I'm trying to sell value. And what can you get for that dollar? And at this point, we're all trying to figure out what might give us some reassurance that we might be able to file a claim and might recoup some damages. So,
okay, well, it's definitely worth the effort now. As Ben Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we want to be revisiting those things, because it's situations like this that really cause us to get into the details. Normally, we don't like to go line by line through insurance policies and things like that. And some of the riders that they just don't exist yet. Is that correct? I mean,
that's right.
Yeah. So they're going to be forthcoming, and those will be things.
It's going to be coming out. I had my first communicable disease exclusion added to a GL policy today.
Oh, wow. For
a June 1st renewal.
Okay.
So that was my first one on there, and it's just something that we want to review, where that just narrows down and makes the trigger on that liability policy that much harder to pull. So it's something to be aware of on upcoming renewals, specifically like beginning of June, July, August. Start seeing things that are going to be coming out from the carriers that will outline exclusions.
Okay, Chad, I have someone that's participating in the chat right now that have asked, I guess you were breaking up about the time that you put out the business interruption formula. And by the way, these are recorded sessions, and to the extent that we can, we're going to put notes wherever we post these videos. So when we post the video to YouTube, or we post the video to our website, or even Facebook, we'll put notes in there as well, because we want to make sure that this conversation is a resource, a valuable resource to everybody who's listening here. But if you're okay with it, Chad, just one more time, would you give us that business interruption formula?
It's business interruption is equal to your net profit or your net loss, plus your monthly recurring expenses, and plus 60 days payroll.
And plus 60-day payroll. Okay, so thank you for putting that question out there for us, so that we could be sure that we got to that live. So let's talk about the phase in, because that probably brings up about 2 to 3 other areas that we really need to be talking about here. So we had Governor Beshear that came out on Friday, and of course there's been things that come out since, but we're now going to be talking about phased in, different people coming back to work. And I'll have to grab it because I didn't memorize it, but we have these 10 rules of reopening a business under the Healthy at Work plan. So I'm going to list those 10. So I'm going to read these off because I don't have them memorized. So in order for some of these businesses who are going to be phased back in, there's phase 1, and we already know who those are. And it's going to even involve, healthcare services, professional services, those businesses that are considered to be essential, kind of fully phasing those back in. So the 10 rules are: 1, continue to telecommute wherever possible, or where possible. So that's been at play for a while. Phased return to work, and I believe by that they mean that to the extent that you can only put your workplace, at least a portion of your workplace in force, and that workforce shifts back and forth. So you don't have everybody on premise at the same time, is what I understand that to mean. So we need to take advantage of that. And here's some ones that really get me, and I'll have to be honest with you, but on-site temperature and health checks, universal masks and other PPE, personal protective equipment, close common areas. We've been doing that for a while, so that's not anything new. Enforce, now this is the language that's used, enforce social distancing, limit face-to-face meetings, sanitizer and hand wash stations, special accommodations, and testing plan. Now that's a lot on the table for a small business owner to have to try to digest. And so we have a few issues at play, mainly kind of involved in the risk mitigation. But let's talk about, and maybe we should talk about the risk mitigation piece of that, because we've got these employees that are now coming. Let's deal with the remote side of this as well as the on-premise side of this. So on the remote side of this, do you think anybody was complicit with the workers' comp standards that are out there as far as the knowledge of the employee to understand about workers' comp and how it works in a remote environment? Because normally those are things that we're supposed to be putting notification up in on-premise. But now we have a large amount of workforce that's no longer on-premise. So how do we deal with workers' comp issue, and how are those impacted by this corona and remote workforce, work from home environment?
Mark, that issue of notice, the Department of Workers Claims, the commissioner put out a bulletin that, well, he said, and the Chamber of Commerce put out a poster that goes to the teleworker.
Okay.
So there is a notice now that people that use teleworkers can go to the state chamber and get the appropriate notice that the Department of Workers Claims says you need to do for your teleworkers.
Okay, so that would assume that you're going to be responsible as the business owner of taking that information and you're getting it into the hand of the employees in some shape, form, or fashion. Right. But is that sufficient, or is there more that we should do as small business owners to make sure that that doesn't come back on us later?
Well, there's been a lot of teleworking. This is not new.
Right.
We have millions of people working from home now. Of course, for small businesses that have never done that, this is going to be different. My advice to this whole thing is that whatever regulations, both voluntary and mandatory, are out there, document that you followed all of it. Otherwise, this is, as I said when we talked before, this is a plaintiff's bar bonanza. Everybody be looking to sue you. You know, I mean, they're already, I heard today that lawyers are going around town trying to sign people up and get them into class action suits concerning the virus. So the main thing here is to document everything that you do that shows that you have followed all the voluntary and mandatory regulations, no matter how tough they are. It's already tough enough. It can't be near as tough when you start reopening as not being able to work at all.
It's piggyback on top of that there. It's no different than doing weekly safety meetings. You know, as an employer, you're going to document your safety meetings and put those away. It's just to back up what George is talking about. At this point, you're adopting these 10 new rules into your organization. That's your written program there. You just need to have a way to document and to support that you actually implemented and followed through on those items. That's your responsibility as a business owner. And you want to be able to prove and show proof that you've done those items. Document is one of them.
One of the things that we discussed earlier too, and I just want to kind of bring it back up here, you know, you're right. The remote workforce, that idea is not new. There's several people that have been, several companies that have a tremendous amount of workforce that operates out of the home. But there's still, you know, quite a few of us who have adopted it, and it's kind of gone back and forth. But you now have business assets also that are in, you know, now that are in the hands of the employees in a remote setting. But also, you know, is there bright lines here as far as claims are concerned about any kind of work injury that might happen inside someone's home while they're working within the scope of employment?
Well, I think, George, I saw NCCI is making some headway with this. So it's come out either. I know one that they were creating a class code for this, but it's not enough information to me has been released to understand what NCCI's determination is on that. The coverage would be afforded in the event someone was working remotely. So in the inception of this as well, before we all started coming out of our offices to come home, there were several carriers, work comp carriers, that had posted that they would be afforded coverage, but then a little bit slipped out a little bit at a time that it would be on a case-by-case basis. But coverage in the event someone had contracted this crazy virus is that coverage would be provided to that injured employee.
Okay.
I think that's where the rub is. You have a person working at home and they get the virus. They're going to have some causal effect that this occurred before they started working at home, when they were still on the workplace.
Well, not even the virus. What about just any kind of a injury that happens in the scope of employment?
There's an enormous amount of case law about injuries wherever they are. And when a person is injured and they want to claim that they were injured while they were working for their employer, they must file a first report of injury form that gets to Frankfurt, where the Department of Workers' Claims will set up a file on it and investigate it. And if there's an insurance company, the insurance companies will investigate it. And they'll look into every case. Is a case by case. There's case by case basis, Chad. Every one of those work at home things are.
Right.
There's no supervision. The only witnesses are probably have a conflict of interest. If a 12-year-old kid says, "Yeah, I saw mommy fall over the diaper," is that credible witness? We don't know. But the law is, if that person files that I was hurt, wherever it is, you have to let the process go. You as an employer can't say, "Oh, you weren't hurt, I'm not going to file it." You see what I'm saying? They have to file. It's part of the law. It's
Okay.
kind
And
of
I guess you would want to encourage them to file it.
Well, yeah. I mean, if they're hurt when they're working, you gotta have unfortunately, the process in Kentucky is back to the old adversarial way that it was before Walt Turner came in the late 90s and tried to make workers' comp claims like health claims. If you had an injury, we paid for it. And for a while, and they cut the costs that paid out to attorneys, and a lot of things were done to try to make it more like healthcare. But over time, it's eroded back to where even the smallest claim, $10,000 claim, in order for an employee to get paid, a lot of times, he's got to hire an attorney, and then the insurance company has an attorney. You have very few voluntary workers' comp settlements anymore. And it's unfortunate because it adds a lot to the cost of the system, but apparently it's necessary, and it's more necessary now, I suppose, because workers are not under the direct supervision of the employer when they're working at home.
Okay. And you brought up yesterday, George, one of the things that I certainly didn't think about, so I wouldn't have known to advise a client on this or not, but you said that worker classification in this environment becomes really important as far as workers' comp is concerned.
Well, it's extremely important because how the law looks at the claim and how the Insurance Rating Bureau looks at the cost of that claim might be in two different pieces, because the legal profession is going to want to look at that claim, particularly the ones with the virus. We're back to the virus, not the working home. But when you're paying somebody because they were injured from the virus, the legal community wants to look at it as an injury. The employer community would like to look at it as occupational disease. We don't know how the NCCI is going to classify it, because it'll cost an employer more if all those virus claims are injury claims versus being an occupational disease claim. Did I answer your question?
Well, you did. That was part of it. Now, part two is that just on the workers' comp policy alone and the premium that's being paid, worker classification becomes critical.
Correct.
As to how
Correct.
that premium is priced.
example I gave the other day is there's bound to be some businesses like contractors who have people in the field they don't want to lose, so
Right.
they send them home. And by them being sent home, they're still going to pay it. But when they're at home, they're less exposed to the same kind of injuries you would get if they were out in the field supervising bulldozers and ditch diggers and all that. So the NCCI has created a separate category for people that have been sent home either to work at home or just to be at home. And the cost for that is a whole lot lower than a rating category where you're outdoors and you're exposed to car washing or contracting or whatever you do outdoors, tree trimming or whatever it is. So employers are, hopefully, all employers with workers' compensation coverage should be getting something from their insurance company. But if I were a good agent, I'd be notifying ahead of that, I would be notifying all my policyholders that there is a separate rating category for all people that were sent home and you're still paying, which is going to be a lower rated category than if they were working somewhere else.
Yeah, and I thought that was a great point, and one that I really hadn't thought about.
They also have said, though, if you send somebody home and you don't pay them and they get hurt, they're not going to be covered. So you want to be doggone sure if you send somebody home and you don't pay them, then you be sure they know there's no coverage for them because they're not working. So that's going to be a sticking point.
Okay, so another layer of notification there.
Yeah, I mean that bothers me because if I'm sent home because I have to be sent home and they're going to pay me, then I should be covered. I get hurt while I'm waiting, and that's one of the rubs that's going to have to be resolved.
Wow, it sounds like there's going to be a lot of court activity.
Yeah,
I can imagine that
But
really gins up.
if you send somebody home and they're not working, more than likely they're going to get unemployment benefits, you see. And that's another thing. We got so many of these tentacles to work through, but there's going to be offsets by virtue of people getting unemployment or the Payroll Act of Congress and all these other things. So your workers' comp is not necessarily going to be hit for everything because there'll be some offsets that the injured person will get compensated from someplace else.
Well, let's open that door a little wider here, since we're on the idea of risk management, and we just outlined the 10 rules here that are really as you're saying, really they're the new policy for employers as we're dealing with this phased return to work. Because then we have an issue of the business owner's liability themselves. And that's something that I think Chad, you had mentioned this earlier, that your BOP policy, business owner policies, and even employment practices. What do we need to be considering there as far as these 10 rules are concerned? And I mean, because when I think of a business owner, I guess the one that jumps out to me is that I become responsible for taking somebody's temperature at the door. When really, in fact, if an employee has got a fever, it needs to be their responsibility to stay home. I don't need to be checking people's temperatures. That's just my personal feeling about it. However, the way these rules are laid out by the governor, then we understand that we have a certain level of responsibility toward that. So as a business owner, my liability now has gone up. So what do I need to be thinking about?
Go ahead, George.
No, I'm going to ask after you talk.
Well, this is a very broad question, but you're getting into the semantics between a business owner policy and a package policy, which is made up of a kind of an a la carte of coverage.
Well, help us understand the difference between the two. So I make sure I ask you the question.
Like we've discussed in the past, a package policy was real popular back in the 2005, 2006 when I first got in, and that's all we wrote were package policies. But now today, a lot of different exposures are written under a BOP, which is a business owner policy. So you'll have Your business income will be an actual loss sustained instead of just a limit on your business income coverage. You'll have some employment practices in there. You'll have some cyber liability included. There's a lot of things that a BOP will give you that a package won't. And so when you're talking from a business owner perspective, which I am a business owner, you have to take in consideration, you have probably an employee handbook with written policies and things like that that go into play. So an employment practices standpoint, are you doing the things as a business owner that makes a safe environment for your employees?
Mm-hmm.
But you need to be aware of what your policy affords you in coverage. And again, kind of go back to what I said earlier, this is the time to kind of do that review to see if you have those things in place. But I think we talked about this in previous conversations, the prudent man that we talked about, and doing the right things that's going to prevent those things from occurring. Those 10 rules we've discussed is going to give you the foundation, the basics of what you can do to make a safe environment and for your employees, not just yourself, but everyone in your office. By doing those things and you're documenting, you put yourself in a much better position. Heaven forbid someone does become ill.
So, a lot of times when as a business owner, and this is just laziness on my part, so I'm gonna self-admit here to kind of just giving the mandate, to just stick me with the minimums, whatever I minimum have to coverage. But this really gets me to rethink that position of minimum coverage. I mean, because I think depending on your type of business, well, this affects all businesses. So I'm not sure that anybody there's nobody precluded from these 10 rules as I understand them. But, this idea of just immediately accepting the minimum coverage here, I'm not sure is something that I want to continue to look at myself. But I mean, I really think, like you said earlier, this is a time where you really want to sit down and examine that policy. We lost you again, Chad.
I lost you again.
We're gonna try to get you back. Hold on just a second. Okay, I just sent you a notice to come back. See if that.
There you go.
But yeah, the BOP policies that we're talking about here, those are going to have to be tweaked, correct?
You can still endorse the BOP policies. Yeah, instead of having 60 days payroll, you can extend it to 90 or 120 days.
Okay.
And instead of a period of restoration being 12 months, you can extend that period of restoration another 90 days up to, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, 120 days in most cases. So you can still endorse, you can increase employment practices. There's a number of things you can do. Cyber liability. And if you have some a little different employee exposures, you can ERISA bonds. There's a lot of things that you can add to those policies that you were traditionally insured with the package.
What do you get your crystal ball out and tell me what you think is going to happen to that BOP policy as a result of this coronavirus?
Oh man.
All right, Chad.
Man, break it up.
Yep, you're breaking up just a little bit. You're back in.
I've got my crystal ball out. What do you want to ask me?
You didn't hear me, did you?
I didn't hear. I heard crystal ball.
Okay.
You just heard crystal ball?
Yeah, I'll speak for you. I'll tell you what I think, and then you tell me what you think. But you don't have to agree with me. But if I were an agent, or I have a client as a consultant, the first thing I'm going to do is make them very aware of two things. Number one, whether or not the present liability policy has any coverage for claims for communicable disease liability. Okay, that's number one. And number two, I'd watch my mail and be in close touch with my agent as to whether or not my insurance company intends to throw an endorsement excluding it before that policy expires. And the third thing I'd do is I'd be darn sure when I got my renewal policy, not to just say, okay, I got my BOP renewed, here it is, here's how much I owe you, put the policy in the drawer. I want to know what the differences are in that renewal versus what I had when the policy expires. Very, very important, because there's so much flux in changing these terms and when those, and the other thing, by the time we renew, if not before, somebody might come along and say, you know, for a premium, we'll write the pandemic exposure, you know, with a deductible or a participation or something. Who knows? You know, I mean, we don't know how fast the market for insurance products is going to catch up.
That's right. That's right.
With the pandemic exposure. And I know the insurance companies are so-called scared to death that these claims on all these policies where there is no communicable disease exposure are just going to balloon completely out of control. So, you know, we're in a real tug of war here with piecing together what we might need and being sure we know what we already have.
Good points there, George.
Yeah, absolutely good points. I mean, this landscape's going to be interesting to see for sure, because I think it, like you said, it's you know, the insurance world hasn't quite adjusted to it yet, and we're going to see what happens when they catch up. But I think you're going to see a lot of things like you talked about earlier mitigated in the courts, which could potentially be another shift and change that's going to come down the pike. So I think that the the thing for me to understand is to really get with my agent and have these very detailed, specific conversations so that I can understand where all my risk and my exposure is as I know it now, but also as I look down the road a little bit, because as you said, Chad, you know, there's certain things that you can adjust on that policy depending on the kind of business that you're in, whether that's the restaurant business, whether that's healthcare, depending on, you know, whether you're a small manufacturer. All those things probably need to be considered, because we've already seen a difference with essential versus non-essential businesses and their abilities to come back in and out of phased work. So all of this comes to roost in making these kind of decisions. So I think that's—
Mark, I spent the last 28 years of my insurance career helping people buy insurance, businesses and institutions, from guys like Chad. And it was surprising to me, because I always delivered all my policies in person and had a detailed conference when I was an agent. And it was unbelievable. A number of policies just get mailed out and here's your renewal. I created a whole format for my clients to go from the process of submitting information for policies for renewals to having those policies delivered in person with a letter explaining the differences if they're renewals. And it went a long way towards having any misunderstandings if you have a policyholder with any size at all. I do it, you know, now you almost have to do it with BOP policies, don't you, Chad?
Right.
I mean, they're going to be in such a state of flux. Even if you've just got a small company, you want them to know what hazards they're going to face when they get their renewal, because they've already been slammed. If they're still trying to stay in business after this, when they've had to close up for a month or two, they're real patriots for work. And they're going to have a lot of struggles more than insurance. So we can do our part, Chad and myself, and people like us, and given a little extra time, being sure that our clients know what they have and what they don't have.
Yeah, communication is key, because the more uncertainty that is out there, the more you've got to communicate, because that's just what kind of settles people's nerves, at least gives them a little bit of clarity. It may not, you know, we don't know to the extent to a lot what's going to happen on the other side of this, but that doesn't mean we can't be at least partially prepared or mentally prepared to shift when we need to shift gears on things like this. So I appreciate that perspective, and there's no doubt why you're considered a mentor in this industry there, George, because I think that's what's needed right now. Agents and all of us that have this, you know, very, very closely connected relationship with our clients, we need to be very, very proactive on the front end of this thing, and that's goodwill that you just can't make.
It's that close client connection,
Yeah,
the relationship.
absolutely. Well, I know some questions came up the other day too, because in addition to, you know, having some small businesses we have some people that are really classified in trade or business, but there are a lot of real estate property owners, whether that's commercial real estate, whether that's multi-unit residential real estate, or a lot of single family home real estate markets. And we have a pretty good, healthy base of clients that are in that field. You know, what do we need to be advising them? What do we need? You know, these 10 rules come into play for a workplace, but what's the real estate owner need to maybe potentially look at here, in your opinion?
Chad?
That's a tough one. I mean, right now we're in an environment of kind of a hurry up and wait, see what's going to happen with the courts. You know, this product is evolving every day until we see what will be viable options for the future of the insurance product for real estate investors.
Mm-hmm.
Chad, does the liability coverage for real estate investors have exclusions with respect to communicable diseases?
That was one that's a great question. We need to go into the form and look at the package on that. There's a dwelling fire product for your smaller investor that's going to have one policy written at a time, and then has some commercial package policies that will probably have a little bit different GL form on that. So you really, it's a case by case. Each carrier can be a little different. Is to review your exclusions under your liability form to see if that would be excluded from coverage if you were negligent in some way as a real estate investor. So that's a great question by George, but it's not going to be every policy's the same.
There's not any special kind of policy that's been developed just for real estate investors, right?
Correct. Outside of that, there's you have a DP3 form for a dwelling fire for a rental property. With the communicable disease exclusion, I would imagine that there is a similar forms, similar endorsements that are on there that's not going to provide and afford that coverage.
So that form provides liability coverage?
That is correct.
You want to PDF me a copy of it?
Yeah, I'll send you over a copy of it.
Now, does that also include loss of rents, or is that a separate policy altogether?
Well, it's built in under the DP3. It does have loss of rents.
Okay.
Where we're getting back to where we were in the beginning of this conversation. It's like a direct physical loss, be fire, things of that nature that would trigger that policy to respond, and not in terms of a communicable disease.
Okay.
Package would be a little different. On a package policy, typically they don't just give away loss of rents. It'd be more of a business income type claim instead of a per location loss of rents claim.
Okay. So what about whether you're a commercial property, or maybe even if you're a multi-unit owner, you've got somebody that's living in one of those units and or works in those facilities. To what degree is the liability on the property owner versus the tenant and or the business that's occupying that space? Is that something else to consider?
That's a great question. We talked about that a little bit the other day. I think you're going to go back in and find out some cases that are going to relate to what we're talking about here, and you're going to see how that shakes out in the courts if they come through. Is there some liability that transferred over to the owner of that property? Sure. Did you have postings in the common spaces? So a laundry room or just a common corridor of an area where people congregate. Did you make those postings? Did you document that you did those things? Those are some things that would be beneficial to a landlord or property.
Now let's qualify that for just a minute. You're talking about the practices that need to be
correct. Yes.
Yeah, right. We're not talking about notifying of somebody that's had it. Or
no,
if you understand that a tenant. Yeah, because we would have. I just want to make sure for our audience listening that there's HIPAA, I guess, laws and disclosure of medical information that we've got to be really careful.
Right.
That we don't do that. But you're talking about just the documentation of, we've got a 4-unit complex. They have a common area that they share, obviously coming in and out of the building, and or a laundry facility or some type of facility that maybe other units use, it's your documentation about what they should be doing while in that space.
Correct.
Okay.
In that common space, that's correct.
Okay. So those are some very important considerations, because I'm not sure, even how many of our own real estate holders have thought to that degree that they document, that they're very careful about that they have the postings, that they try to, as we've said at the very beginning of this isn't just an insurance situation. This is just mitigating risk. Regardless whether that insurance policy has to kick in or not, it's you as the property owner doing what's prudent yourself to kind of hedge that liability by making sure that you're informing all your tenants, or you're informing your businesses who occupy the space, that they need to be doing their part in being safe as well, correct?
Yes.
What's really going to be interesting here is that so much of this is going to have to be settled out adversarially, judicially, or however. And nobody can go to court.
Yeah. Well, because right now we don't have any precedents.
No, I mean,
And that's what the courts end up doing. The courts end up settling on some of these cases. It established precedents, and then everybody starts to understand the rules that you work around in this process. Now, not to say that that the line doesn't get a little bit brighter as we go further and further into these court cases. However, we just don't know what we don't know yet.
Right.
The most important thing is to be sure that you do the right thing, that you follow what we talked the other day in our conference. What would the prudent man do? And unfortunately, there are a lot of business owners who get their back up and say, the government's not going to tell me what to do. I'll let people in my front door. Well, those are probably the people that are going to get sued and not have any coverage and not be in business very long. That's what's going to happen.
Do you mind just kind of open that up a little bit more for everybody to listen to? When you're talking about the Prudent Man Rule, would you kind of explain that a little bit more in detail, just so our audience can have a better understanding of what that rule is?
It's a legal concept that you very rarely hear people talk about outside of the legal community. But it's basically doing the right thing. In any circumstance, what is the right thing? What would a prudent man do? And a prudent man would be a guy that looked at something and did it to have the very best outcome for whoever's involved in it. And that's it. And our governor very, very well puts it in common terms. Do the right thing. There's so many people out there that don't want to do the right thing because they say you're infringing upon my freedom or some other constitutional right that I have. But by not following all this, they're infringing upon my health. Somebody's going to have to settle that too, see? Whether it's when you tell a business owner that he has to take his employee's temperature. How do we settle that?
Mm-hmm. It's a tough one.
The prudent man, in order to do everything they can to offer a safe working environment, would do taking the temperature. It's just what it is. You go to the nth degree, that's reasonable. The word reasonable, okay? If it's not reasonable, it's not efficient, it costs too much, the thing to take the temperature is $1,000 rental a week and you only make $500 selling whatever it is, it's not reasonable. It's got to be reasonable. Have I done what you wanted to hear?
No, that was perfect. That was exactly what I wanted you to do, to really put that out there in layman's terms, because that is really important. And I know that, some of these rules are going to be hard to swallow a little bit, and not so much, you just expect everybody to be responsible, but that's not always going to be the case. You can't always hedge against somebody else being responsible for what they need to do, but that certainly doesn't preclude you of your responsibility to do what you need to do. And I think you even said, it is important sometimes, and we do tend to get our dander up when we're talking about certain rights and privileges and things like that being taken away from us. And we're going to try to stand more on principle and not move off that principle simply because we're stubborn, or we're just not going to let the government intervene in that way. And that is tough, because a lot of times one step leads to another, and it can be a very slippery slope. But in circumstances like this, I think we all have to kind of take a step back, and we have to say, you know, sometimes it's okay for me to be wrong, for me to do what's right. That's okay. I get that, and I'm going to accept that, and I'm always going to take that high road. There's something to be said for that too. And I think as business owners, you know, we need to care. That's what it really needs. Well, it boils down to is we need to care.
If you run
we
a
need
business,
to do the right thing.
to care. You run a business. If you run a business and you're open to the public and you're dealing with members of the public, you have to care.
Yeah,
that's just a basic. I need to ask you a question, Mark.
No, wait a minute. I'm the panelist. I'm not the. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
You're going to like this, because what you've done here, I know you're doing in other facets of operating businesses. And how do people access these videos as they accumulate? They go to your website?
Oh yeah, we make all of these, we record them, and we make them all available on our personal website, only because we have to have a place to collect them, you know. So we're happy to put them all on our website. We have a YouTube channel that we also post it to. We post it to Facebook, so anybody can go back and review it and look on Facebook and get links to anywhere they want to get it to. And so we're trying to make these available. We make all the footage available to anybody who comes in and participates, so that if they want to forward that information on to someone else, the whole point of this series is to really just pull together a community, a resource of information, so that everybody that's listening can really benefit from the collective wisdom that we're trying to bring to the table here. And you guys have done a phenomenal job, and I cannot thank you enough for your willingness to come and spend this time with me and with us, to really share that wisdom, share that perspective, help our business owners, help our individuals understand what we need to be doing here, because that's really what it's all about. We're here to help each other, and that is great that you guys came on and are willing to participate in that together with us, because that was really the intent. I'm not the expert. You know, we're a CPA firm, but we're not the end all be all. We're not trying to be the end all be all. But if we can quarterback and we can bring other people to the table who can be, and it's of benefit to the general populace, then we're happy to do that as a service. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Well, thanks for having us.
We're just a host.
Have you done any other webinars concerning the virus and some other aspect like that?
We have. We've looked at the medical side of it, as we had one of the Lexington infectious disease doctor, Dr. John Meek, came on and kind of helped us understand what they were looking at and some things that we need to be doing from the medical front. We've tried to look at all the topics that would come into play. We had a psychologist, Dr. Gary Stewart, who came on in one of the previous episodes to help us understand that during times like this, what's going to get us through is resilience, you know, building a resilience and having.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Are those identified on your website?
They are. Yeah.
Related to the virus?
Yeah. Every one of them. It's all under the relevant conversations in the current crisis. So that's we're tagging every one of them with that. So that anybody that wants to can go back. They're also posted on LinkedIn. We have people that share them there. And again, it's just about broadcasting. And what we really wanted to do, just to kind of speak to your question, George, is we have this mass media out here who's feeding us all kinds of information, good and bad. But I think for our local community, we wanted to hear from local voices. And that's why it's important for guys like you to come, and gals to come on board, is because you're the local resources, you're the local voices. And we're participating in this as a community, and our community starts here. You know, the world that we live in starts with me, and it starts with my family, and it starts with my immediate circle, and it starts in the community that I live in. And so that's why we wanted to really make it centric to Central Kentucky, because this is our family.
Yep.
This is our family. So thank you guys so much. We'll make some show notes available. If there's any kind of links or sources or PDFs you guys want to make available to people in general, you know, forward those to me in an email, and we'll make sure that we make those links available with the videos as we post them. So thank you guys for participating with us today.
Do you have our contact information up some way?
Yes, and your contact information will be on those videos as well. So
Good.
anybody that needs to reach out to you can,
That'd be
Thanks,
good.
Mark.
for sure. So thanks, George. Thanks, Chad. You guys have been great. And again, as we like to say at the very end of these sessions, we know that there's just a tremendous amount of stress and strain, and all of us have different things that we're facing and that we're going through. Some of us have been able to enjoy good health during this time, and we should feel very blessed and fortunate that we are. Others that are in our community aren't getting to enjoy the same privileges that we're getting to enjoy just to have this conversation. And our hearts and our thoughts and our prayers go out for you guys. We certainly want to continue to thank the people who are working on the front lines of this, who are in the healthcare arena. We know that you're facing a tremendous task yourselves, and you're putting yourself out there at risk. And we want to extend a thank you to you as well, and certainly continue to pray for you and your families. And we know that your lives have been turned upside down. So we're all in this together, as we say, and that's what we're trying to do in this forum.
To work
So
with.
appreciate everybody.
We've really
Thanks,
enjoyed
Mark.
it. Thank you.
All
for
right.
that.
Everybody have a great rest of the day, and we
You bet.
welcome you to come back on Thursday. And Thursday we'll have Bob Quick and Ray Daniels from Commerce Lexington come on and kind of help us understand more about what they're
We
seeing.
Go to your website in order to listen to those.
Yeah, you can do that, and we'll send out an invitation to those as well. Thank you guys for participating. Everybody have a great rest of the afternoon.
Mark, keep me on your
Thanks, Mark.
invitation.
I will. We'll do that, George. Appreciate
Thanks,
you
George.
guys. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.